Welcome to the show today. And we are going to be talking today about the 6 psychology-based tricks for saving more money. Now, let's face it, most of us want to save more money. We want to be better savers. We want to have more financial stability, peace of mind, security. And right now, at the start of 2023, we are at the start of the year where we are in this period of what psychologists call a fresh start effect period, where more of us are likely to take action towards a particular goal or build momentum towards something that we want to do based on this new beginning. And that new beginning can be a new year, it can be a new month, it can be a new week, it could be your birthday. And you decide that actually now I'm 42, I'm going to do things differently. And so it's a really good opportunity to start to think about where your motivation sits when it comes to building a better relationship with money. And there's some really quite scary statistics that over half of UK adults, it's around 47%, or just under half actually, don't have money set aside for change in life events like unemployment, redundancy, loss of a loved one, legal problems, serious illness, those kind of things. And that comes from Aldermore's annual savings tracker research. And I find this really interesting that often we have a very curious relationship with savings. Why is it that some of us save and others resist it? And I can say that from the research that we've done around our money story types, we've done a lot of research in our communities over the last 5 years around the architect story type and the impulsive. And the architect story type are for the natural savers. They're people who don't even necessarily have to think about it because you'll already be doing it. You'll already be feeling more financial stability and peace of mind by putting savings aside. And actually, for a lot of architects, their challenge is more around spending than it is around saving. Whereas as a complete parallel, the impulsive money story type have no problem spending and they feel more challenged when it comes to saving money. Now, the reason this happens is because the relationship we have with money is really a mirror reflection of the relationship we have with ourselves. And so our ability to make money and hold on to it is represented by the values, the belief systems around ourselves. And that largely comes from learned behaviours and adult experiences. And these two things together create the relationship that we have with money and the relationship we have with ourselves. One of the reasons that we have this disparity between the natural savers and the natural spenders is it has nothing to do with how smart you are or how much willpower you have. Let me just get this out clear as day at the start of this episode, because I don't want you to sit there thinking, I'm a terrible person, I don't have a lot of willpower, I'm not smart enough. Like, it has nothing to do with your intelligence levels. It has nothing to do with your willpower or lack of it. The reason that we have this polarity between being a saver and a spender is because of learned behaviors, whether that's past behaviors or present behaviors or behaviors based on perceptions. So a learned behavior might be that you've mirrored your parents' relationship, that you've learned this kind of helplessness or scarcity mindset with money. That could be because of what your parents experienced, and that came from their parents' experiences with money. We know that generationally, money generations form a massive part of our relationship with money. Of course they do, because every single piece of information that we are brought up around comes from our environment. And a huge part of that is the learned behaviors that we experience from caregivers or from parents. So it could be that a lot of your lack of savings behaviors come from this learned helplessness. And it doesn't just come from childhood, it can come from adult experiences, it can come from experiences where we have had a failed attempt to save money. Like, how many times has that happened where we've set ourselves a goal on January the 1st, I'm going to save £1,000 this month, and then maybe something has happened in that month that's prevented you from doing that, and then we're like, oh, I'm a failure, I'm bad with money, I'm terrible with money, And then we spend the rest of the year in a place of lack and scarcity and beating ourselves up and shooting on ourselves and sitting in this place of guilt and shame. And so they can come from these failed attempts. They can also come from sudden loss experiences. So they can come from a change in your health, or they can come from a redundancy, or even a more significant trauma, things like COVID, traumas such as abuse, and all sorts of significant traumas that can have an impact on how we feel. So this isn't anything to do with your willpower or how clever you are. This is just simply around our relationship with savings. Okay. And one of the other reasons why some people just don't save is that they kind of cling on to this perception that things will just get better. Like, it will just sort itself out. And what consequently happens is we just sort of bury our heads in the sand. Or we have this belief, like the pacifist money story type, where we just kind of think somebody else can deal with that, or, oh, I'll just get lucky, like I'll win the lottery or something will happen. And so we kind of shoulder that responsibility. But I think a lot of the perceptions around saving is that we have often this like wishful thinking behavior, where a lot of psychologists actually refer to this as false optimism, where we have this kind of like distorted image of like the future, and it doesn't actually bear any real relevance to our current self. So we kind of convince ourselves that everything's going to be fine, or trying to save money is too hard, or, oh, I've just left it too late. Like I'm in my 50s perhaps, and I've left it too late. There's no point in getting started. We have this kind of struggle between current needs and future needs. And a lot of people really struggle with identifying with their future self. Like this might be you. Maybe you're somebody who just really struggles to think about the concept of future self, what you're going to be doing in retirement, what you might be doing in 2 years' time, 5 years' time, 10 years' time. And the reason that we often struggle with this is because our brain loves to keep us in the present moment. It loves to keep us feeling safe. And the future is so uncertain, right? We have no idea what's going to happen. This might be one of the reasons why you're not saving, is because you're struggling to bring upon this perception of your future. This sort of failure to see your future self might be keeping you stuck in an extension of your present self. So you're more likely to spend money on what you need right now and what you desire right now, rather than thinking about the future. So there's lots of reasons why we struggle with saving money. And I want to share with you 6 psychology-based tricks. Oh my goodness, I need to go back to bed today, for saving more money. Okay. And the last one I'm going to share with you right at the end is probably not one you've heard of before. So make sure you listen out to the end. So number 1, the first psychology-based tip for saving more money is to think about switching from saving for something that is something that you want, that's rooted in pleasure, happiness, joy, to setting yourself an intention or a goal that is pain goal orientated. Now, please don't press stop on this. You're probably thinking, why would I even want to do this, Catherine? I want you to ask yourself, what would happen if I didn't start saving? Now, for some of you, that might be like, oh my God, if I didn't start saving, like I wouldn't be able to retire. I wouldn't be able to travel. I wouldn't be able to send my kids to university. I wouldn't be able to live in my dream home. I wouldn't be able to upgrade my health. I wouldn't be able to do these things. And that sometimes can shift the feeling in the body to something that is way more motivational than saying to yourself, I want to set up a savings plan because I want to move house. I want to set up a savings plan because I want to go on this holiday. Can you feel the difference there? Some of you will be like, no, much more rooted in things that I want. But for some of you, this switch, this mindset shift from switching from pleasure-based goals to pain-based goals might be enough to shift you into trying to identify or create a goal in mind in the future that hasn't yet happened, that has an element of motivation that sits behind it. As human beings, we have such an innate ability to be able to think about what we need right now. And one of the reasons why it's so hard to think about future self needs is because we have such a hard time just even identifying future self. And for some people, future self is like a completely different person. It's like, I'm going to become this person. And it's like, no, you're already that person. You're already that future self. It's just you right now in 5 years' time, 10 years' time. By default, if we have a difficult time in perceiving this future self, this leaves us a problem. And then we end up in this constant feast and famine cycle, okay, with our relationship with money. So I really want you to think about future self is you right now, maybe a little bit grayer, a few more wrinkles, but it's still who you are. It's just in a future time. So think about, does the desire to get out of a rut or to think about saving that's going to get you out of trouble or that is going to help you overcome something, is that switch to getting out of that pace of pain better and more motivational than setting yourself a goal that's based on happiness and joy and intention? Okay, so really something to consider for yourself there. Tip number 2 is I want you to think about relating the amount of money that you're intending to save or the amount of money that you are going to spend as opposed to save to your hourly rate or what your time is worth. Okay, really, really powerful exercise. It's so easy to just take money for granted and be like, oh, it's just another £10.50 for an Amazon book. It's just another £5 for an extra Costa coffee. And we kind of ignore, well, how long would that take to actually earn that money? This can be really powerful because time is the one most important asset. And we often don't put enough focus on time. You know, for many of you, you'll be following our work and this podcast or our YouTube channel, or you'll be in some of our programs because you want to create more time back. You want to create semi-passive income streams. You want to make more money because time is your most important precious asset. So before you buy anything, try and work out roughly how much of your work would be required for you to have to make to go and buy that item. So maybe you're on £25 an hour and you want to buy a phone that is £800. In order to earn £800, you'd have to work 32 hours or 4 business days. So is that new phone worth 4 days of your time? Is it a fair reflection? Is it a good return on investment for your time? Because time freedom is so incredibly important. So think about that. Relate your spending to your hourly rate. And if that doesn't feel like a good measure, then save it instead. Or the other thing you could do, which is also super clever, is to work out your pay or how much you pay yourself in your business, work it out on a weekly basis, not monthly basis. So what we're doing here is we're stretching time. And there's been some really cool research that shows when you work out your pay per month, you make different decisions based on when you work out your pay per week. And all we're doing is changing the environment, changing the conditions. Psychologically, we are giving you a different cue for you to measure the importance or the value of money by just changing the time frame. Do this for yourself. Let's say you're making £1,000 a month, like that's £250 a week. How would you behave differently with money when you think about it in that terms? Rather than £1,000, it's £250 every week. So just changing some of the cues psychologically can have a massive impact on the way that you behave with money. Super interesting, right? Okay, tip number 3. I hope you've got a pen and paper. There's so much juiciness in this episode today. Is to think about automating your savings with little nudges. Okay, so a lot of people think, oh, it will take me so long to save that amount of money, or I've left it too late. And they think they have to start big. And it's really not about that. It's about the small incremental nudges, the small incremental habits. It's the compounding effect of those small steps that have a huge impact. So one thing I want you to do is to just choose one frequent purchase that you currently make. Okay, that might be a Costa coffee. It might be that you buy 5 books a month on Amazon, or you've got a Spotify subscription or a Netflix subscription, or go through your bank statements and have a look. Like, what are you spending frequently? Maybe it's having your nails done, or having your hair cut, or buying clothes, or like just choose one thing that you frequently purchase and redirect that to a savings account. And that will give you a little nudge in the right direction. Not something massive, like something that's like a small amount, which might be a £5, it might be £20, it might be £50, it might be £100. But just choose one redirection. Okay, maybe it's a gym membership you're not going to use. Maybe it's a subscription to a meditation app that you just never get around to using. Just choose one thing and redirect that. Nudge that in a different direction and connect in with it emotionally, because that's going to give you the purpose. The reason we often don't do this is because the act of saving for a future event is so hard because it hasn't yet happened. Okay, it's that future self debate. I want you to do that exercise, and I want you to automate it. Use some of the roundup apps that you can get out on the market right now, companies like Plum or Clio, where you can round up those expenses, those spending habits, so that they automatically saves it for you. I actually do this directly on my Starling bank account. They have a roundup facility in the app itself, and you can pick one of the pots that you have set up. And so every time I make a spend on my bank account, it rounds it up to the nearest pound and it shimmies that money into that pot, into that savings pot. So it just automates it for you. And then, it might not be a huge amount, but it's the habit and the principle that makes the biggest difference. Now, there's a little extra upgrade tip here for you, because actually the best thing to do, in my opinion, is not just using the roundup apps, so it saves money, but invest it. Like, move it from savings into investing. And let me just give you an example of the impact and the difference this makes. Okay, so if you invested £10,000 with a investment return of 5%, okay, 5%, I've chosen that because it's the historical average return on the stock market. It doesn't take into account things like tax and inflation, but let's just take an average return of 5%, okay? In 10 years' time, that £10,000 would have grown to £16,014. In 20 years' time, it would have grown to £27,143. So you've almost tripled your money, and very likely stayed ahead of inflation without any effort. You've invested that money in the stock market. Some of you might be thinking, but I know nothing about the stock market. How does that work? Like, go and listen to some of our previous episodes on investing, or come into our investing course. I'll pop a link in the show notes. This is a really basic investing course that helps you get started with making your first investment. From 20 years of being a financial advisor, it really doesn't have to be complicated at all. In fact, the less complicated, the better. But if you invest small amounts of money, if you don't have 10 grand sitting there to invest, go and invest it regularly, bit by bit, every month in the stock market. It's what we call pound cost averaging. You're drip feeding money into the stock market month by month. So you're reducing the risk, you're reducing the volatility, and you're going to get better returns over the longer term, potentially with stock market investments, than you would in cash. And there's lots of variables around this, but over any given 10-year cycle, the stock market has always outperformed cash. So, whilst you can't guarantee future returns and you may want to seek financial advice in this area, it's just a really good habit to get into about, don't just look at your savings goals this year, look at your investing goals as well. Tip number 4. So this is the 4th psychological tip to saving more money this year. I want you to think about switching your language around saving. And I want you to think about switching from budgeting to a savings plan. Okay, this is a really, really clever little hack. It's chaptered in my book, actually. It's Not About the Money, where I talk about just this shift in your language. Budgeting in itself can seem quite restrictive. It's like, why would you want a budget? Like, you've worked hard for this money. Why would you want a budget? Budget's very restrictive. Saving is more expansive. So just changing the way that you think and talk about allocating your money to different purposes can have a huge impact on your ability to save more money. So I want you to think about this. It's not about setting up a budget plan. It's about setting a savings plan in place that's going to help you to become much more expansive in your language rather than restricted. And just try it out loud. Like, just say to yourself, I am budgeting more money this month, or I am saving more money this month. Like, it's a completely different vibe. And a lot of people think, I'll just set up a budget plan and it will fix everything. But it doesn't necessarily do that, because it doesn't help you with the psychology and the psychological reasons why we don't stick to budgets. So a savings plan, I'm setting up a savings plan this year, as opposed to I'm setting up a budgeting plan, feels much more expansive. So think about your language that you're using with yourself to help you to save more money this year. Tip number 5 is think about your timeline. Now, this is really important because so many people think there's like a golden rule, how much money I should be saving, but it really depends on your timeline. And what I mean by this is to think about your demographic, think about your time in your life. Do you have young children? Are you in your 20s? Are you in your 50s and looking forward to retirement and probably beating yourself up and saying that you haven't done it early enough? We need to balance out this optimism with reality. And so I want you to think about your timeline. Park everybody else's needs. This is about you and your needs. So think about, what do you need for your savings goals? What is going to help you to move forward, as opposed to staying stuck or going into this name and blame, shame situation where we just keep looking back based on perceptions of decisions that we feel like we should have made. So think about the timeline that's relevant for you and balance that optimism with reality. All we can do is get started. That's all we can do today. We can sit there and blame ourselves about what we should have done, and we can hope and desire that we want to have millions of pounds in the bank, but it's about balancing that optimism with reality. So think about your timeframes. Tip number 6 is to find the patterns in your current spending habits and redirect just one of them. So this kind of links back into my earlier example where I was talking about these small nudges and automating these savings habits in order to save more money. But here it's very specifically about just finding one of your spending habits and redirecting it into a savings habit. So one of your spending habits might be, when I feel crap about myself, I overspend on clothes. When I don't feel good enough, I don't feel like my qualifications are good enough, I go and buy another course or buy another book. When you're in that situation, emotionally, we often don't feel good enough. We don't feel deserving. And so our brain goes, right, how can I feel good about myself? I'll go and do this thing. And we do that thing and we get this rush of dopamine. We feel great about ourselves for a period of time. And then we go back into the same recurring belief around our self-worth. So if you know what that is, if you're listening to this thinking, yeah, I'm definitely overspend on books or courses or qualifications or food, there's a big link between overspending and emotional eating. So find that pattern and make an intention to redirect one of them. And when I say redirect, pick something that feels really motivational. And going back to point number 1, that might be that's getting you out of a situation that's painful for you right now. It might be getting you out of your job. It might be getting that credit card paid off, or it will be something rooted in something that is pleasurable and desirable for you. So an extra holiday this year, for example, or to retire a year earlier, to have a year's worth of expenses saved up, or 3 months worth of living expenses saved in an emergency fund. So find the pattern in your spending and redirect it. Now, remember what I said at the start about the fresh start effect. Okay. I want to give you a bonus tip. Okay. Something that you can go and action. So I want you to go and grab your phone. I want you to pick a specific fresh start time frame. And I want you to set yourself an intention that you most desire for this year. So whether that is next Monday, whether that is on your next birthday, whether that is at the midway point in your year, maybe it's at the start of the next quarter. I want you to go and grab your phone, find that date in your calendar, and put a little reminder on there right now that says Catherine says, go and create a fresh start effect, financial intention, and listen back to some of the other episodes that we've talked about with, put a picture behind it, make it an all sensory participation, put a color on it. If you've got a Google Calendar, put a nice color behind it. Even put it on as a reminder that pings up on your phone. Set yourself like an audio recording, record yourself talking about this new financial intention, and then put a little reminder on your phone so it pings and reminds you of your fresh start effect. You do not have to wait until the 1st of January. You can create a fresh start effect every week, every month, every quarter, every birthday. Okay, you don't have to wait until the 1st of January. So let's just summarize those tips for you. So the 6 psychology-based tricks for saving more money. The first one we talked about was switching from something that you want or desire to a pain-based goal. So what would happen if you didn't save more money? Number 2 is to relate it to your hourly rate or your time. How much is that spend worth in your time? And then redirect that into savings instead. Tip number 3 was to automate your savings with nudges. Tip number 4 was switching your language from restrictive language like budgeting to expansive language like savings. Tip number 5 is to think about your timeline. Forget everybody else's. Tip number 6 is to find the patterns in your spending and redirect one of them. And then the final bonus tip was to go and put in your calendar a fresh start effect. This is a time at the start of a new week, a new month, your next birthday, halfway through the year, the end of a quarter. Grab your phone, put in that fresh start effect timestamp, and set yourself the most powerful financial intention that you desire for yourself for this year.